Korgath and the Shard of Pure Madness, a BoneSpears StarShips presentation. Enter the Barbarian and his warband. The sun hung like a bloated carcass in the sky, spilling crimson light over the battlefield. Screams echoed across the shattered stones of the ancient ruin, where Korgath Skull-Splitter and his warband carved their way through an army of shrieking cultists. Blood sprayed in grotesque arcs, soaking the dust, the stone, and the men as Korgath's axe, Gorehowler, cleaved through flesh and bone with brutal efficiency. His bellow of triumph shook the air as another body crumpled at his feet. More! Come, weaklings! Korgath grows bored. Around him, the warband reveled in the slaughter. To his right, Sister Galea, tall and broad-shouldered, swung her warhammer, Judgment, with religious fervor, smashing cultists into bloody mist. Her hair, shorn close to the scalp, was matted with blood, her armor dented and smeared with gore. She bellowed passages from her god's scripture, as though each pulverized skull brought her closer to divine enlightenment. "Blessed be the broken," she roared, slamming her hammer into a cultist's ribs, snapping them like kindling. "The end times are upon you, heathens." To Korgath's left, Snurk, a small, wiry man with a crazed look in his eyes, scampered like a demented rat. His grin was manic as he lobbed glass vials filled with his latest concoctions. Each vial exploded with a shrill cackle, sending splinters of bone and smoldering flesh flying in all directions. One unfortunate cultist turned into a walking fireball, sprinting in circles before collapsing into a twitching heap. "Burn! Burn! Burn!" Snurk howled, tossing another vial with gleeful abandon. "Let's see how many pieces you can fly into, eh?" Further back, Rozhak, lean and sharp-featured, moved like a shadow, sliding silently through the chaos. His dark eyes gleamed as he darted behind a distracted cultist, plunging his poison daggers into their back. They gasped, convulsed, and collapsed without ever seeing their killer. Rozhak's cold precision stood in stark contrast to the other's frenzied madness. And then there was Malgrin. Malgrin, the mind scrambler, was laughing. No, cackling, as he unleashed twisted spells into the battlefield. His eyes glowed with the unsettling energy of his hallucinogenic potions, and reality itself seemed to bend and warp around him. One cultist, lunging toward him with a blade, suddenly found their arm turned into writhing tentacles. They shrieked in horror, and Malgrin simply giggled, casting another spell that turned the ground beneath their feet into liquid. "Look at them dance!" Malgrin sang, his voice high and sing-song. Reality's such a fickle thing. Korgath relished the chaos, the senseless destruction, the blood-soaked carnage. This was where he belonged, in the eye of the storm, surrounded by death, with no purpose but to smash, to crush, to conquer. But something gnawed at him, even amid the frenzy. An itch he couldn't scratch, a desire for something more than just slaughter. His eyes flicked to the horizon, where the ancient ruins' towering spires loomed like the bones of a forgotten god. "Finish them!" he bellowed, his voice a command that thundered over the battlefield. His warband responded with renewed fury, dispatching the remaining cultists with ease. Within moments, it was over. The ground was littered with bodies, cultist blood soaking into the cracked earth. Korgath's warband regrouped, their eyes wild and bloodshot, each of them caught in the post-battle high. Aftermath in the ruins. The ruin loomed before them, a crumbling monument to some ancient power long forgotten. Vines wrapped around its weathered stone pillars, and strange symbols were etched into the walls. But Korgath wasn't interested in history. He stepped over a heap of corpses, pushing aside a broken stone slab with a grunt. Snurk was already sifting through the remains of the cultist camp, pocketing strange trinkets and muttering to himself. Malgrin, still buzzing from the after-effects of his magic, drifted near Korgath, eyes wide and pupils dilated. "That was fun," Malgrin giggled, waving his fingers as if casting invisible spells. "Do you think the gods were watching? I hope they were watching." "Enough," Korgath growled, raising a hand to silence him. His eyes had found something glowing faintly in the dim light. At the far end of the ruin, half buried beneath rubble, a strange stone altar lay cracked open. On the altar, a shard of something gleamed, a jagged piece of crystal that seemed to hum with its own energy. Malgrin's head snapped toward it, his expression going from manic glee to sudden, intense focus. "Oh, what's this? What is this?" He scurried toward the shard, his eyes widening with greed and madness. It's the shard of pure madness, he whispered, reverence creeping into his voice. I've read about it. It's said to warp reality itself. Korgath, do you see? This is it. This is what I need to unlock the fifth dimension. Korgath's brow furrowed. Fifth dimension? Speak sense, sorcerer. Malgrin shook his head frantically, pointing at the shard. Sense? Sense doesn't matter. This shard, it can tear reality apart, break the laws of time, space, everything. It's power, Korgath. Pure, unchained power. Korgath approached the shard slowly, his eyes narrowing as he felt the hum of energy resonate through his bones. He could feel the chaos within it, the raw potential for destruction. His hands twitched, craving the weight of his axe. Power, he muttered. Enough to burn the world. Enough to burn. Worlds, Malgrin corrected, his grin growing wider. But it's not here anymore. It's been moved, protected. Korgath's eyes flared. Where? Malgrin swallowed nervously. Lady Vyrax, an eldritch sorceress. She controls it now. She took the shard to her citadel, hidden away in a pocket dimension. Sister Galea spat onto the ground, her smile hard and ruthless. A sorceress. Let me smash her skull in the name of the end times. Razak, lurking in the shadows, stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. This Vyrax, she's no ordinary sorceress. She controls more than just magic. She controls reality itself. Her citadel is a trap, a nightmare. Korgath smiled, but it was not a smile of pleasure. It was a smile of hunger. His fingers flexed around the haft of his axe. Reality itself? Let her bend it. We'll break it. Razak's dark eyes gleamed with quiet calculation. You'd risk it? Korgath turned, his gaze sweeping across his warband. Bloodied, bruised, and triumphant, they stared back with equal parts madness and loyalty. What's the point of living, Korgath rumbled, if not to risk everything? Malgrin clapped his hands excitedly. Oh yes, let's risk it. Let's bend reality until it snaps. Galea raised her warhammer to the sky. The gods are watching us now. Let them see us tear this sorceress apart. Journey to the citadel of chaos. The sky above them was no longer a sky. It was a swirling miasma of color and shadow, bleeding into itself like spilled paint on a canvas that refused to dry. Korgath's warband trudged forward, the ruins of the cultist temple now far behind, yet the land before them felt no more real than the broken battlefield they'd left. The path twisted and buckled, and the earth occasionally fracturing beneath their feet, revealing brief glimpses of something. A kaleidoscope of shifting forms, blurred faces, and landscapes that didn't belong to this world. Korgath, ever unfazed, marched forward, his axe slung over his broad shoulder, eyes narrowed as he stared into the madness ahead. Sister Galea, he grunted, voice rough as gravel, tell me again about these gods of yours. Are they the type to laugh at this sort of place? Sister Galea, always looming just behind him, glanced at the swirling colors with hard eyes. She was sweating under her armor, but kept pace easily. Her hammer, blood-stained from the battle behind, swung heavily in her hand. The gods don't laugh, Korgath. They judge. This land is cursed. It bends, twists, like the will of Vyrax herself. The gods are watching us, yes, but there's no humor in their gaze. They are waiting for the reckoning. Korgath snorted. Reckoning, you say? And what will they make of this place? A reckoning in a place that can't stand still long enough to be reckoned with? They'll burn it all the same, Galea said firmly, her grip tightening on judgment. Everything falls to fire in the end. Korgath cast a glance at her, half amused. Fire, eh? I'd rather just tear it down. Chaos doesn't need flames to work. Behind them, Snurk stumbled and cursed as another of his vials exploded prematurely. The explosion knocked him off his feet, sending a nearby rock spinning into the air like it had been catapulted by an invisible force. Snurk? Korgath barked. Control your fires or I'll control them for you. Snurk, grinning sheepishly as he clambered back to his feet, waved his hands defensively. I got it! I got it! These damn ingredients, though. The way the ground's shifting, it's making everything funny, see? The usual stuff's going off early, all right? Unstable, yeah, unstable. Appeared out of nowhere, his voice low and even. Maybe don't light fires in an unstable land, Snurk. Or do. I care little either way. He slipped back into the shadows of the trees, or what passed for trees in this warped place. They bent at impossible angles, roots spiraling into the sky, branches dangling like upside-down chandeliers. Ahead of them, the path twisted again, folding over itself as if the very world was writhing in pain. The warband approached a clearing where the ground seemed to ripple like water underfoot, but instead of liquid, it was earth, alive and breathing. The air hummed with energy, and there was a faint whispering sound, like distant voices carried on the wind. This place, it isn't natural, Rozhak said quietly, emerging from the dark once more. We're being watched. I like it, Malgrin chimed in, his eyes wide, pupils unnaturally dilated. He staggered toward the edge of the clearing, his hands tracing strange patterns in the air. Feels alive, like it's watching us back. You hear it too, don't you? He turned to the others, his grin manic. Whispers. They're telling me secrets, things no one else can hear. Korgath grunted, his expression unchanged. You're hearing things because you've burned your brain with too many of those potions. Malgrin's face split into a grin. Exactly. The trick is to listen. The more you drink, the more you hear. This place speaks. The shard's close, I can feel it. Vyrax's hold is strongest here, you see? She's bending the very land around her citadel, making it her reality. He twirled in place, hands still moving in erratic gestures. Beautiful, isn't it? Korgath didn't answer, though his eyes swept over the landscape. The ground stretched out in unnatural angles, rising into steep cliffs that defied logic, only to loop back into gentle hills. Gravity itself seemed fickle, bending in random directions. At times, they had to step carefully as the earth would tilt under their feet, then suddenly right itself with a jarring snap. Is it just me, or did we already pass this tree? Snurk muttered, eyeing a twisted, gnarled trunk that jutted out from a patch of ground. No, Rozhak replied, voice barely audible. We haven't moved at all. Time has looped. The first encounter. The first wave of Vyrax's minions appeared suddenly, beings of warped flesh, half-formed and incomplete. Their bodies were twisted amalgamations of humanoid shapes, but where their arms should have been, there were only jagged fractures in reality. They moved like nightmares brought to life, their limbs flickering between worlds, snapping in and out of existence. More of these things, Korgath muttered, spinning his axe into position. Not solid enough for a proper fight. One of the creatures lunged at Sister Galia, its face a blur of twisted flesh and dark energy. She swung judgment down with a ferocious roar, crushing the thing's chest, but instead of blood, the creature dissolved into smoke, reforming beside her, its distorted mouth open in a silent scream. Fight like real men, you twisted bastards, she growled, swinging again, only for the creature to vanish before her eyes. Rozhak, ever calm, slipped between the shadows, daggers drawn. His first strike landed on one of the creatures, but instead of dying, it split apart, its form becoming two smaller beings that seemed to flicker and warp as if caught between realities. They don't die, Rozhak said coldly. They multiply. They can't multiply if I burn them first, Snurk shouted, tossing a vial into the fray. The liquid inside erupted on impact, sending a spray of fire across the battlefield. The flames caught two of the creatures, and for a moment, their forms wavered as the fire licked at their fractured bodies. See? Snurk grinned. Fire solves everything. But the creatures didn't burn. Instead, they absorbed the fire into their twisted bodies, and with a sickening crack, their forms reshaped, becoming more solid, more real. Not this time, Rozhak muttered, eyes narrowing. Korgath swung Gorehowler with brutal precision, cleaving through one of the creatures. The air rippled as the blade made contact, but again the creature merely reformed, its body flickering like a broken image. Malgrin, however, was laughing. It's not a fight, you fools. You can't kill them. They aren't alive, not in the way we understand. He raised his hands, eyes rolling back in his head as he began to chant. Watch. You need to break their hold on this reality. A wave of distortion spread out from Malgrin, and as it touched the creatures, they wavered, flickered, and then vanished as if they had never been. See? Malgrin giggled. All you have to do is unmake them. Korgath frowned, not impressed. Next time, tell me before I swing. And twisted reality. As they moved further into Vyrax's domain, the world around them became more unstable. Time bent in unpredictable ways. At moments, the warband felt as though they had walked for hours, only for the sun to remain fixed in the sky. At other times, seconds seemed to drag into eternity. The colors of the landscape shifted, the trees bleeding into the sky blending into the earth. Korgath's patience began to wear thin. Reality's falling apart, he muttered, his voice more contemplative than angry. What's the point of order when everything ends up like this? Order's a lie, Malgrin answered, twirling a small object in his hands as he walked. Everything's chaos, Korgath. The gods, the laws, time. Nothing stays still for long. Vyrax understands this better than anyone. She's just bending it to her will. And what happens when we bend it too far? Korgath asked, eyeing the swirling sky above them. Who knows, Malgrin grinned. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. That's the fun of it. The citadel of Lady Vyrax. The citadel stood before them like a fever dream brought to life, a fortress of spiraling towers and impossible angles, with walls that seemed to shimmer and shift as though alive. The air around the citadel buzzed with energy, an unnatural hum that made the skin crawl. It was a monument to chaos and order fused into one, the perfect expression of Lady Vyrax's twisted mastery over reality. The very ground they stood on felt unreliable, as if it could drop away at any moment or twist them into some other dimension altogether. Snurk whistled low, his eyes wide. Well, that's a thing, Korgath grunted, his fingers flexing around the handle of his axe. A thing will break, he growled. Get ready. Beside him, Sister Galea rolled her shoulders, her warhammer, Judgment, already in her hand. It feels wrong here. The gods are watching, but it's like they're too far away. This place doesn't belong in any world. Vrax, always silent, melted into the shadows with ease, disappearing before anyone had noticed he was gone. His quiet precision was unnerving, but it was just what they needed. Malgrin, by contrast, stood at the edge of the group, grinning ear to ear. I like it, Malgrin whispered, his eyes gleaming with unhinged excitement. The air, the way it twists around you. Can you feel it? It's alive. Snurk, eyes darting around as if something might jump out at him at any second, was less enthusiastic. Yeah, alive. Just what I was hoping for. A building that's alive. Korgath cut through their chatter with a single motion. Razak, Malgrin, Snurk, take the back way. You know what we're here for. His gaze shifted briefly to the towering citadel, where a shimmering light could be seen at the highest point. The shard of pure madness. Find it. Steal it. Do whatever it takes. Galea and I will be dealing with Vyrax. Razak reappeared, nodding slightly before vanishing again into the shifting shadows. Snurk groaned but started rummaging through his satchel of explosives. I guess we'll find the shard or blow something up trying. Malgrin giggled softly, already moving with a maddened purpose. Oh, we'll find it. Or we'll become it. It's all connected anyway. With that, the group split, Razak leading the others into the labyrinth of the citadel's warped hallways, while Korgath and Galea made for the front entrance. Korgath's path, confrontation with Vyrax. Korgath and Galea pushed open the citadel's front doors, which bent inward like liquid metal before reforming behind them. Inside, the walls seemed to stretch and compress at random, with passages folding in on themselves, looping back or disappearing entirely. Gravity flickered, and Korgath had to keep adjusting his balance as the ground tilted unpredictably under his feet. Hold your footing, Korgath muttered as Galea nearly lost her balance. Vyrax's magic. Galea's lip curled in disgust. She'll answer for this blasphemy. There's nothing holy about bending reality to your whim. The two pressed forward, navigating through the distorted maze. Doors led to nowhere, or worse, some opened into brief flashes of impossible scenes. A battlefield of screaming soldiers that vanished as soon as they closed the door, or a towering library where the books floated in the air, pages fluttering like moths. Korgath growled, already impatient with the citadel's tricks. Where are you, sorceress? Korgath bellowed into the shifting space. His voice echoed strangely, bouncing back at him from too many directions at once. As they rounded a corner, the space in front of them melted and reshaped itself. Before them now stood a towering staircase of light, leading upward into the heart of the citadel. Korgath could feel it. This was where Vyrax was waiting. Finally, Korgath said, starting the climb. Each step felt like it stretched out forever, only for them to suddenly be closer than they should have been. The walls flickered like an afterimage, and Korgath gritted his teeth against the feeling of being watched from behind his own mind. They reached the top and stood before an enormous set of doors, gleaming with an unnatural, silvery light. Beyond them, Korgath knew, was Vyrax. Galea gripped her warhammer. Judgment will be passed. With a single motion, Korgath shoved the doors open, revealing a vast, shimmering chamber. At the center stood Lady Vyrax. Heist path. The madness below. Rozhak led the way through a series of narrow passages, his form almost a shadow in itself as he slipped past the traps and distortions of Vyrax's citadel. Behind him, Malgrin cackled as if each bizarre twist in reality was a gift, while Snurk muttered curses under his breath. "This place isn't right," Snurk hissed, watching as the walls shifted around them. One minute, the corridor seemed endless, stretching on into infinity. The next, it bent backward, looping into itself in a manner that defied all logic. "That's the beauty of it," Malgrin chimed in, his voice laced with manic joy. "Reality's just a suggestion here. Vyrax, oh, she understands the truth. Everything's flexible. Why not twist the world to your liking?" Rozhak, ever focused, didn't reply. His eyes scanned the walls, noting subtle shifts in the patterns, places where reality bent just enough to hint at traps. They passed one such trap, where the floor seemed to shimmer, and Rozhak motioned for the others to stop. "Step here, and you won't come back." Snurk froze, staring down at the shimmering floor. "I hate this place." Malgrin stepped forward eagerly. "Then don't step. Float. We're all just floating anyway." Ignoring him, Rozhak continued forward, leading them down a twisting staircase that seemed to fold in on itself like a piece of origami. At the bottom, they found a massive, pulsating door that appeared to be made of living flesh. It pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat. "I'm not touching that," Snurk muttered, taking a cautious step back. Malgrin, however, was already grinning madly. "The shard is near. I can feel it, hear it. Let's knock." Without waiting, Malgrin raised his hand and began chanting softly. The door, if it could even be called that, quivered and then slowly began to part, revealing a dark chamber beyond. Inside, the air shimmered like heat off a desert. And in the center, hovering above an altar, was the shard of pure madness. The shard was not just a crystal, but a pulsing, living thing. Its surface shimmered with every imaginable color, and several that defied comprehension, constantly shifting and swirling in a maddening dance. Reality itself seemed to buckle around it, bending inward as if drawn toward the shard's impossible presence. Rozhak's expression remained calm, though there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. "Let's take it and leave." Snurk stared at the shard, wide-eyed. "We're just gonna take that?" Malgrin's smile was wide and unsettling. "Yes, take it. Let's see what happens when we hold the universe in our hands." Korgath faces Vyrax. Korgath's eyes locked onto the figure in the center of the chamber. Lady Vyrax stood before him, draped in robes that shimmered like liquid starlight, her face half hidden behind a veil that shifted between the present and the unreal. Her eyes, glowing with the cold fire of a goddess, fixed on him with a mixture of amusement and curiosity. "Korgath Skull-Splitter," she said softly, her voice echoing unnaturally through the room. "The man who would tear down worlds. Tell me, what do you seek in my citadel?" Korgath tightened his grip on Gorehowler, his gaze never leaving her. "The shard of pure madness. And your head, if I have time." Vyrax laughed, a sound that seemed to ripple through the very fabric of the room. "So bold, so predictable. Men like you, always thinking destruction is the answer. But you've stepped into my world now, Korgath. Do you think your strength will matter here, where reality bends to my will?" Korgath took a step forward, his muscles coiled. Strength always matters. Galea raised her warhammer, her voice filled with fury. "Your time has come, sorceress. Judgment will be passed." Vyrax's eyes flicked to Galea, her expression turning almost bored. "Judgment? No, little priestess, you misunderstand. I am the one who judges here. And your gods, they are silent." With a wave of her hand, the room around them began to shift, the walls folding inward, the floor warping as gravity pulled them in different directions. Korgath staggered slightly as the ground tilted beneath him, but he stood firm, his gaze still locked on Vyrax. "I've seen enough of your tricks," Korgath growled. "Let's end this." Vyrax smiled. "As you wish." The seduction of Korgath stood in the center of Vyrax's chamber, the air thick with a heavy, intoxicating sweetness that seemed to seep into his lungs. The room around him was alive, shifting as if the walls themselves were breathing. A swirling, ethereal light bathed everything in a warm, dreamlike glow. Vrax stood at the far end of the chamber, her form barely obscured by the delicate, flowing fabric that clung to her body. The robe parted as she moved, revealing the curves of her hips, the swell of her breasts, each step deliberate and graceful. "Korgath," she purred, her voice soft and full of promise. "You've come so far, and yet you still fight against what you truly desire." She moved closer, her robes shimmering as they fell off her shoulders, sliding down her body in a way that was both natural and deliberate. Her skin glowed with an otherworldly light, smooth and perfect, like polished marble warmed by the sun. Korgath's breath hitched slightly as she approached, the primal side of him stirring with a hunger he couldn't quite contain. "You talk of power," Korgath growled, though his voice held less of its usual edge. "But you've twisted the world to suit your will. That's not power. That's control." Vyrax smiled, slow and sensual, her eyes locking onto his. "What is control but the ultimate form of power, Korgath? Chaos, destruction. It's all meaningless without the strength to shape it." She circled him slowly, her fingertips brushing lightly over his bare chest, sending a ripple of heat through his body. "You and I, we're not so different. You wield chaos as a weapon, but what if you could bend it? Shape it into something more?" Her lips hovered near his ear, her breath warm against his skin. "Imagine, Korgath, all of this, all the power in the universe bent to our will, together." Korgath's muscles tensed, but not in resistance. The heat of her body against his, the intoxicating scent that filled the air, it all made it difficult to think, difficult to focus on anything but her. Her hands were on him now, sliding across his chest and shoulders, each touch electric. He could feel the raw, pulsing magic in her veins, and it called to something deep inside him. "Why fight it?" Vyrax whispered, her lips brushing against his neck. "You've fought for so long. Let yourself feel something more. Let yourself give in." She pulled him closer, her body pressing against his, soft and yielding in all the right ways. Korgath's mind raced, but his body was already responding. The primal urge to take her overpowering the caution he'd carried with him. Vyrax's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as she felt him begin to surrender, her hands sliding lower, her lips finding his in a kiss that burned with the intensity of a wildfire. The seduction deepens. They moved toward the bed that seemed to materialize from the floor, a lavish, sprawling thing draped in silk and shimmering fabrics that caught the strange light of the chamber. Vyrax pushed him down onto the bed, her movements fluid and commanding. Korgath, for the first time in a long while, didn't resist. Her robes were gone now, discarded in a heap on the floor, and Vyrax was bare before him, her body a masterpiece of curves and sensuality. She climbed atop him, her touch as much a command as it was an invitation. Korgath's hands found her waist, pulling her closer, their bodies pressing together in a heated, desperate tangle of limbs. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was no citadel, no mission, no shard. Just the two of them, wrapped in each other, lost in the primal rhythm of desire. Vyrax's lips traced a path down his chest, her body moving in perfect harmony with his. The room around them pulsed with the same energy that coursed through their veins, reality itself bending in response to their passion. The heist, Malgrin, Snurk, and Rozhak. While Korgath was lost in the depths of Vyrax's seduction, the rest of the warband was not idle. Rozhak moved silently through the labyrinthine corridors of the citadel, his footsteps making no sound as he led the way toward the shard of pure madness. Behind him, Snurk and Malgrin followed, though not without some difficulty. "This place, it's twisted," Snurk muttered, glancing nervously at the walls that seemed to shift and pulse with every step. "I swear, the floor wasn't like this a second ago." Malgrin grinned, his eyes wild with the excitement of it all. "Reality's just a suggestion here. Don't fight it. Embrace it." He twirled his fingers, casting small, harmless spells into the air as they walked, watching with delight as the walls responded by rippling like water. It's all connected. The shard, the citadel, Vyrax, all part of the same web. Rozhak said nothing, his focus entirely on the task ahead. They reached a massive door at the end of the corridor, and Rozhak stopped, his eyes narrowing as he examined it. "This is it," he said quietly. "The shard is beyond this door." Snurk approached the door, his fingers twitching. "So, what's the plan? Blast it open?" Rozhak shook his head. "No, we need to be quiet, subtle." He turned to Malgrin. "Can you get us through?" Malgrin's grin widened. "Oh, I can do more than that. He raised his hands, muttering an incantation under his breath. The door shimmered for a moment, then slowly began to dissolve, the edges melting away like wax under a flame. On the other side of the door, the shard of pure madness hovered above an altar, pulsing with an unnatural light. It was a jagged, crystalline object, constantly shifting in shape, its colors shifting through hues that defied understanding. The air around it seemed to bend and warp, reality itself curving inward toward the shard. "There it is," Snurk whispered, his eyes wide with awe. "We're really going to steal that thing?" Rozhak stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the shard. "Yes, and we're going to do it quietly." Back in the chamber, the passion reaches its peak. Vyrax arched her back, her body moving with a fluid grace that made it impossible for Korgath to resist. Their bodies were slick with sweat, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they moved together in perfect synchrony. The world around them seemed to blur, the walls melting into soft, hazy shapes as the intensity of their passion grew. "Do you see it now, Korgath?" Vyrax whispered, her voice low and sultry. "This is power. This is what it means to bend reality, to control it." Korgath's mind was hazy, clouded with lust and desire, but even as they moved together, there was a small part of him that remained aware. He knew, deep down, that this wasn't just about pleasure. It was about control. Vyrax was trying to claim him, body and soul, to bend him to her will. But in that moment, as her body moved against his, he didn't care. "The shard is stolen." Back at the altar, Rozhak reached out carefully, his fingers brushing the shard. For a moment, it felt like the universe itself recoiled at his touch, but he didn't hesitate. He plucked the shard from its place, and the room around them seemed to shudder in response. "We've got it," he said, slipping the shard into a pouch at his side. "Let's get out of here." Malgrin's eyes gleamed with excitement. "Oh, this is going to be fun." The three of them slipped away, moving quickly and quietly through the citadel's winding halls, while Korgath and Vyrax were still lost in their heated embrace. The aftermath. Reality sets in. As the heat between them began to cool, Korgath lay still, his chest heaving from the intensity of their encounter. The intoxicating fog in his mind began to lift, and with it came clarity. He could feel Vyrax's presence still lingering beside him, her soft, lazy breath against his skin. Her fingers traced light, teasing circles across his chest, but what she saw as satisfaction felt to Korgath like the calm before the storm. "You see now, don't you?" Vyrax purred, her voice sultry, dripping with triumph. "What we could be together. Gods, bending reality, shaping the universe to our will. You and I, Korgath, unstoppable." For a moment, Korgath considered the vision she painted, a world of power, dominion, and endless chaos to be wielded like a weapon. It was tempting, even thrilling in its own way. He could almost taste the blood on his lips, the destruction they would unleash. But then, something darker stirred deep inside him, like a beast rising from its slumber. This wasn't freedom. This was another kind of control, another leash, another cage, no matter how gilded or seductive it might be. Korgath was a destroyer, not a ruler. He didn't bend the world to his will. He shattered it. He turned his head, locking eyes with Vyrax. Her smug, satisfied smile made his blood boil. With a grunt, Korgath shoved her off, sitting up on the edge of the bed. His muscles tensed, like a predator shaking off a moment of indulgence. "You think that's what I want? To rule? To shape this world into your version of power?" Vyrax's smile faltered, just slightly, but she kept her tone playful. "Why fight it, Korgath? You crave chaos. I offer you the means to control it, to become something more." Korgath laughed, a deep, rough sound that echoed in the chamber. He stood, his imposing frame towering over her as he grabbed his axe, feeling the familiar weight of it in his hand. "You don't get it, do you? I don't want to control chaos. I want to be it. I don't rule over anything. I break it." Vyrax's eyes darkened, her gaze sharpening. "You fool," she hissed. "You could have had the universe at your feet." Korgath snorted, turning toward the door. "What use do I have for a universe at my feet when it feels better to tear it apart?" The sorceress, still draped across the bed, her posture shifting from seduction to frustration, watched him go, her voice laced with disappointment. "Pity. You could have had it all." Korgath paused, his back to her. He swung the axe over his shoulder, the steel glinting in the strange light of the room. I never wanted it. I only want to see it burn. The heist and chaos unleashed. While Korgath and Vyrax were locked in their seductive battle of wills, Malgrin, Snurk, and Rozhak moved like shadows through the twisting corridors of the citadel. The air around them was heavy with magic, warping the walls into strange, undulating shapes. Malgrin, high as a kite on his hallucinogenic potions, was practically skipping ahead of the others. His eyes wide, pupils dilated, and his mind deep in the madness of Vyrax's reality. "This way!" Malgrin giggled, his fingers tracing swirling patterns in the air, as if he could see some invisible map laid out before him. "She's trying to hide the paths, twist them, but I see them. Oh yes, I see the truth beneath it all. It's all a game, and I know how to win." Rozhak followed, silent as always, his eyes sharp and calculating. He didn't trust Malgrin's drug-fueled visions, but they had gotten them this far without triggering any of Vyrax's traps. For now, the sorcerer was their best guide. Snurk, on the other hand, looked a nervous wreck. He clutched a handful of explosives, his fingers twitching with anticipation. "This place ain't right," he muttered under his breath, eyeing the constantly shifting walls. "We should have blown a hole through it and been done with it. All this sneaking, it's unnatural." Malgrin grinned back at him, eyes sparkling with madness. "Unnatural? Unnatural is where the fun begins." Malgrin's madness and magic. As they moved deeper into the heart of the citadel, the air grew thick with magic, shimmering with strange lights and shadows that flickered across the walls like ghosts. Malgrin's movements became more erratic, his body swaying as he danced through the traps that Vyrax had woven into the fabric of the citadel. "Watch your step, lads!" Malgrin sang, his voice lilting in a sing-song manner. "Step on the wrong stone, and you'll fall up, or down, or sideways." Snurk grumbled, hopping over an invisible line Malgrin had indicated with a twirl of his hand. "I hate this place." Rozhak crouched low, his eyes narrowing as he examined the floor ahead. There was a faint shimmer in the air, a thin, almost invisible thread of magic stretched across the hallway. "Trap," he whispered. "Can you deal with it?" Malgrin giggled. "Deal with it? I'll unravel it. I'll make it dance." He flicked his fingers, mumbling under his breath, and the thread of magic seemed to writhe like a living thing. With a snap, it dissipated, the air suddenly feeling lighter. "See? It's all in the dance." Rozhak raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He motioned for them to move forward. Malgrin's mad magic was working for now. Snurk's explosives, breaking barriers. They reached a massive, shimmering wall of energy. Vyrax's final barrier, protecting the shard of pure madness. The air around the barrier crackled with raw power, pulsing in time with the shard's chaotic energy. Snurk's eyes widened as he stared at the wall, beads of sweat forming on his brow. "Well, this is it," Snurk muttered, pulling out several small, though volatile-looking devices. "Magic's too thick here. Only thing that'll get through this is good old-fashioned boom." Rot stepped back, giving Snurk the space he needed. Malgrin leaned forward, eyes gleaming with excitement. "Oh, this is going to be beautiful." Snurk positioned the explosives carefully along the edges of the barrier, his hands steady despite the manic energy radiating off him. "When I blow this, it's going to tear a hole through her defenses. But," he hesitated, "it might tear through reality a little too." "Good," Malgrin grinned. "Tear it all down. Let's see what's underneath." Snurk rolled his eyes, but lit the fuse. Everyone back. The explosion wasn't just loud, it was reality shattering. The walls of the citadel trembled, cracks spiderwebbing through the stone. The barrier rippled and then shattered like glass, the shards of magic dissolving into the air as a hole tore through the dimensional fabric itself. The ground beneath them buckled, and for a moment it felt as though they were floating, weightless in the void between worlds. Colors that shouldn't exist danced in front of their eyes, and Snurk swore he saw the floor trying to crawl up the walls like a living thing. "Reality's unstable," Snurk mumbled, staring wide-eyed at the shifting chaos around them. "Perfect," Rozhak said, his voice low and calm as always. "Let's move." Rozhak's precision, stealing the shard. Beyond the shattered barrier lay the heart of Vyrax's power, the shard of pure madness. It hovered above an altar of shifting stone, pulsing with chaotic energy, its form constantly changing. One moment a jagged crystal, the next a swirling mass of light. The very air around it was warped, bending time and space like a gravity well. Rozhak approached slowly, his steps silent, his eyes never leaving the shard. He could feel its pull, like a black hole drawing everything toward it. His fingers itched to take it, but he knew one wrong move could trigger something catastrophic. "Careful now," Snurk muttered, watching nervously. "This thing's more unstable than a goblin with a hangover." Rozhak ignored him, his focus absolute. He reached out, his hand brushing the shard. For a moment, the entire citadel seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a quick, precise motion, Rozhak plucked the shard from its place. The world shuddered. Malgrin, eyes wide with a manic grin, chuckled. "Didn't we do this already?" Chaos unleashed, the dimension collapses. The moment the shard left the altar, everything began to fall apart. The walls of the citadel twisted and groaned, cracks spreading like wildfire as the dimension itself started to collapse. Reality bent and warped, time fracturing into chaotic loops. Explosions rocked the citadel as rifts tore through the fabric of space, revealing glimpses of other worlds, other realities. "We need to get out of here, now!" shouted, stuffing the shard into his satchel as he scrambled back toward the entrance. Malgrin laughed, spinning in place as the world crumbled around him. "It's all coming undone. Glorious. Absolutely glorious." Grabbed him by the collar, pulling him away from the chaos. "Move, or we die here." Vyrax's fury. Back in the chamber, Vyrax felt the moment the shard was taken. She sat up sharply, her eyes flashing with rage. The air around her crackled with power, her perfect, seductive facade melting away as her body shifted into something far more terrifying. Her skin rippled, turning to molten shadow, her eyes glowing with eldritch fire. Her robes dissolved into dark tendrils that writhed and twisted around her, her form becoming something part goddess, part nightmare. She turned on Korgath, fury blazing in her eyes. "You dare take what is mine?" Her voice reverberated through the chamber, shaking the very walls. Korgath, now free from her seduction, grinned, his grip tightening on his axe. "Looks like your little toy just walked off with my friends." Vyrax's body rippled with power, her form expanding as the entire citadel bent to her will. "I am Vyrax. I am the shaper of worlds, the mistress of reality. You think you can defy me?" Korgath rolled his shoulders, his blood pumping with renewed energy. "I don't think, sorceress. I just break things." With a roar, Vyrax unleashed her full power. The room warped, twisting into impossible shapes, the floor dropping away into an abyss of swirling chaos. Time itself seemed to fracture, moments overlapping as the battle began. Final battle, Korgath versus Vyrax. Vyrax's form still towered over Korgath, dark energy swirling around her, but something had shifted. Her power flickered, unstable now that the shard had been taken. She lashed out with magic, trying to warp reality as she had before, but her strength faltered. Her illusions were weaker, thinner. "You dare defy me?" Vyrax snarled, though there was a desperate edge to her voice now. Korgath grinned, sensing her vulnerability. He swung his axe with brutal precision, cutting through the faltering illusions. Each strike tore at her power, leaving her more exposed. The citadel trembled, but now it was Vyrax who was unraveling, not the dimension. As her magic weakened, Vyrax's towering form began to shrink, the dark tendrils retreating. Her once godlike appearance faded, leaving her vulnerable and diminished. Her robes tattered, and her body drained of its ethereal glow. Korgath approached, towering over the now weakened sorceress. She lay on the ground, her breath labored, her eyes wide with disbelief. This is not how it was supposed to end. "Should have known better than to try and control chaos," Korgath growled, his axe resting on his shoulder. "You lost the moment you tried to tame it." Escape from the collapsing citadel. Meanwhile, Rozhak, Snurk, and Malgrin fought their way through the collapsing halls of the citadel, dodging falling debris and rifts in space that threatened to pull them into other dimensions. Explosions rocked the ground beneath their feet, each one tearing a hole in the fabric of reality itself. "Move it!" Rozhak barked, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. Snurk clutched the shard tightly, his heart racing as the world collapsed around them. "This whole place is coming down!" Malgrin laughed, twirling his fingers in the air as reality twisted and broke. "Yes, let it fall. Let everything fall. They reached the entrance just as the citadel began to cave in on itself. Rozak shoved Malgrin forward, and the three of them sprinted toward the portal that led back to their world. The end game. In the heart of the citadel, Korgath delivered the final blow. His axe cut through Vyrax's last illusion, her form flickering as the power that held her world together began to unravel. She let out one final desperate scream before her body dissolved into a writhing mass of shadow and chaos. Korgath stood amidst the wreckage, the citadel crumbling around him, the air thick with the scent of magic and destruction. He grinned, satisfied. That's how you break a world. With that, he turned and made his way out of the collapsing citadel, ready to join the rest of his warband as they escaped the madness they had unleashed. Conclusion: the fall of Lady Vyrax. The ground beneath Korgath's feet shook as the citadel began to tear itself apart. He stood over Vyrax, her once majestic form now reduced to something almost pitiable. Her body, once wreathed in shadows and power, was weak, trembling, and stripped of its former strength. She lay there, glaring up at him, her eyes still burning with pride and rage, but the magic had drained from her veins, leaving her fragile, vulnerable. Korgath raised Gorehowler above her, the blade gleaming with the eerie light of the collapsing realm. "It's over," he growled. "This is what happens when you try to control chaos." Vyrax, gasping for breath, gave him a twisted smile, her voice barely a whisper, but still dripping with venom. "You fool, you could have had everything. Power beyond your wildest dreams. We could have ruled together, been gods." Korgath let out a sharp laugh. "I don't need to be a god." He brought Gorehowler down, but instead of striking her, he cleaved through the magic tether that bound the citadel together. The blade cut deep into the very foundation of Vyrax's reality, and with that final blow, the dimension began to collapse. The citadel groaned, walls buckling and folding in on themselves. Cracks in the fabric of space tore open, revealing glimpses of other dimensions, flashes of bizarre worlds, and swirling chaos. Reality itself twisted, as if trying to unravel under the weight of its own madness. Vyrax coughed weakly, her pride finally cracking. She reached out toward him one last time, her voice laced with desperation. "Korgath, you don't have to walk away. Stay. I can still give you everything. Eternal power, dominion over worlds. You felt it. You know what we could be." Korgath stared down at her, his lips curling into a wry smile. "Yeah, you were good in bed." He paused, letting her think he might be reconsidering. Then he laughed and shook his head. "But that's all you've got." Vyrax's smile flickered, fading into a mix of rage and defeat as she realized he was walking away, not out of fear or temptation, but because he simply didn't care. Capturing Vyrax, Korgath's surprise decision. But then, as Korgath turned away, something made him pause. A strange, impulsive thought crossed his mind. He glanced back at Vyrax, lying there powerless and glaring up at him. His hand tightened on his axe before he swung it over his shoulder. He bent down, grabbed a length of rope from his belt, and, with surprising ease, gagged her and tied her up. Her eyes widened with shock as he hoisted her limp body over his shoulder like she was nothing more than a sack of grain. She tried to squirm, but her weakened state made her struggles feeble. Korgath turned toward the exit as the citadel crumbled around him. Vyrax barely conscious, her body bouncing with every heavy step he took. As he stepped through the wrecked doorway, he found Gallia hammering at the entrance, trying to break through. She had been outside the whole time, her face red with fury and frustration. The moment she saw him, her eyes widened in disbelief. "Korgath!" she barked, her warhammer judgment still raised. "I've been trying to break through. The gods only know what took place in there." Korgath gave her a wry grin, the bound sorceress slung over his shoulder. "It's over. Found something worth keeping," he said, chuckling as he continued past her. Gallia's eyes narrowed at the sight of Vyrax. "You tied her up? Why not just finish her off?" Korgath shrugged. "She was good in bed. That's worth something." Gallia stared at him, dumbfounded, before shaking her head with a snort. "You're mad." Together, they emerged from the crumbling citadel, Korgath leading the way as the rest of the warband appeared from the collapsing halls. Escape from the citadel. Rusnurk and Malgrin stood at the entrance to the citadel, the shard of pure madness safely tucked in Snurk's pack. The world around them was dissolving into chaos. Great chunks of the citadel were being swallowed by the collapsing dimension, swirling into the void. Time itself was warping, moments stretching and contracting as they ran. Rozhak's eyes narrowed as he saw Korgath carrying Vyrax. "We leaving with her now?" he asked coolly. Snurk, wide-eyed and jittery from the explosions, pointed a finger at the sorceress who was dangling awkwardly over Korgath's shoulder. "What the hell are we bringing her for?" Korgath shrugged, barely fazed by the chaos swirling around them. "She was good in bed," he grunted, his voice deadpan. "That's worth something." Snurk blinked, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. Malgrin burst into hysterical laughter, his body shaking as he leaned on Rozhak for support. "Oh, Korgath, you mad bastard. Only you." Korgath grinned, slapping Vyrax's bound form on the back as they sprinted toward the exit. "Let's get out of here before the whole damn place eats us alive." The citadel collapses. As they ran, the dimension around them continued to unravel. Explosions of magical energy burst from the cracks in reality, tearing apart what remained of Vyrax's citadel. The walls folded in on themselves, chunks of stone and shimmering magic spiraling into a black void that stretched out in every direction. Rozhak led the way, his eyes scanning for the safest path through the destruction. Behind him, Snurk set off a few more explosives just for good measure, cackling as the already collapsing walls exploded in flames and rubble. Malgrin twirled gleefully, his eyes wide as he watched the dimension crack and splinter. "Oh, the beauty of it all! Look at it! Reality's unraveling like a poorly stitched tapestry." Korgath grunted, adjusting Vyrax's weight as they neared the exit. "Keep moving. Malgrin, we're not getting stuck here with your poetic nonsense." They burst through the last crumbling wall just as the entire citadel collapsed behind them, the swirling vortex of chaos consuming what was left of Vyrax's domain. The portal they had entered through shimmered before them, flickering wildly, threatening to close at any moment. "Go! Go!" Snurk shouted, diving through the portal without hesitation. One by one, the warband leaped through the portal, Rozhak last as he cast one final glance at the collapsing world behind them. With a flick of his wrist, he disappeared through the portal, just as the citadel was swallowed whole by the void. Final reflection. Korgath's musings on chaos. The warband tumbled back into their own world, landing hard on the rocky ground. The air was still, the night sky above them clear and calm, an almost surreal contrast to the madness they had just escaped. Korgath grunted as he hit the ground, pulling himself to his feet and dusting off his armor. Vyrax lay in a heap at his feet, still bound and gagged, her eyes blazing with fury, but her power utterly gone. Malgrin stretched, yawning as if he hadn't just witnessed the collapse of a dimension. Well, that was exhilarating. Rozhak stood, brushing off his cloak with a calm, practiced hand. "The shard?" Snurk grinned, holding up his pack with pride. "Safe and sound." Sister Gallia strode up, hefting judgment, her warhammer, over her shoulder. "The gods were watching, Korgath. They see everything, even in that twisted place." Judgment was passed, and the chaos was purged. Korgath, bruised but victorious, glanced down at Vyrax before turning to his warband. Chaos wins again. As they began to walk away from the ruined portal, Korgath pulled a flask from his belt, taking a long swig of the strong drink inside. He let out a satisfied sigh, looking back at the smoldering remains of the portal. "Controls for the weak," he muttered to no one in particular. Then, with a grin, he raised his flask toward the sky. "Chaos, now that's where the fun is." Malgrin, still giddy from the experience, stumbled forward and nodded. "Here's to the madness. May we tear it all apart again next time." Gallia shook her head but smirked, her voice wry. "One day, Korgath, the gods will judge you for that madness." Korgath chuckled, raising an eyebrow at her. "Let them try." The warband laughed, bruised, battered, and victorious. As they marched toward the next adventure, Vyrax tied and gagged behind them. The chaos they had left behind seemed like just another day in the life of Korgath Skull-Splitter and his warband. If you enjoyed the story, we would appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. And if you have any ideas, drop them in the comments for future stories.